In the fall of 1989, Emily Parker, a young highway patrolwoman in Dallas, Texas, vanished during her night shift. Her patrol car was left running on the side of a lonely highway. Her radio crackled, but she never answered. No one knew where she went. For 17 long years, her family begged for answers. Police searched forests, dragged rivers, and chased every tip, but found nothing. Rumors swirled. Had she run away? Was she kidnapped? Or had something far worse happened? Then, one quiet morning in 2006, a fisherman cast his line into a silent reservoir near Dallas. When he pulled it back, it wasn't a fish. It was a corroded police badge. And scratched into the back were 3 chilling words that would finally crack the case wide open. If you want to see the full shocking story, watch till the end, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments exactly where you started watching. I want to know who got hooked first. It was a crisp evening in 1989 when Officer Emily Parker stepped out of the small-town police station. She adjusted her uniform, checked her patrol belt, and smiled at the few officers still inside. "See you tomorrow," she said lightly, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that no one noticed. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the empty roads. Emily climbed into her patrol car, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. The radio crackled softly with routine chatter from dispatch, nothing unusual. As she drove down the familiar streets, the camera would follow her taillights as they disappeared into the darkness. Houses were dark, people asleep, the occasional dog bark echoing across the neighborhood. The hum of her engine blended with the distant sounds of the night. Emily was experienced, careful, and respected by everyone who knew her. She had been on the force for 4 years, and this shift should have been ordinary. She checked her mirrors and adjusted the radio. Her thoughts were methodical: report times, traffic checks, potential hazards. In a town this quiet, every shift required focus. One wrong move, one missed signal, and the consequences could be serious. Emily drove past the last cluster of streetlights and onto the open highway that led out of town. The trees formed dark walls on either side of the road itself stretching endlessly into shadow. Her heartbeat was steady, but her senses were alert. Something in the air felt heavier tonight. She radioed in a routine message, confirming her patrol route and estimated check-in times. Dispatch replied with the usual acknowledgement, calm and perfunctory. Emily's headlights cut through the darkness, the only motion in a world that seemed to have paused. The town she left behind faded into memory as she drove deeper into the night, unaware that this would be her last routine shift. Every second ticking forward would take her closer to a mystery that would haunt the community for years. Around 1:14 in the morning, Emily spotted a car pulled over on the side of the highway. She slowed her patrol car and reached for the radio. "Dispatch, I'm pulling over to check on a vehicle at mile marker 23. No passengers visible yet," she reported, her voice calm but professional. The silence of the night seemed to amplify the crackle of the radio, each word cutting through the darkness. The small headlights of her patrol car reflected off the wet pavement, and the dark outline of the other vehicle stood stark against the roadside. Emily parked behind it, carefully positioning her car for safety. She clicked on her flashlight and stepped out, scanning the car for movement. Her senses were sharp. Years on the force had taught her that things are rarely as simple as they seem, especially at night on a lonely stretch of road. Moments passed. No one emerged from the stopped car. The wind was calm. Distant owl hooted. Emily's hand rested lightly on her radio. All quiet so far, she murmured to herself. She walked closer to the other vehicle, shining her flashlight inside the windows. The interior was empty, doors locked, and the engine cold. Nothing seemed out of place, yet her instincts whispered caution. She called back to dispatch to confirm the situation. "It's just an unoccupied vehicle. No plate, no passengers. I'll wait here a few minutes before moving on," she said. There was no reply other than the soft crackle of the channel. Minutes ticked by. She checked her surroundings again, the trees, the shoulder of the highway, the faint outline of hills beyond the road. Everything seemed normal, but the stillness felt unnatural. Emily stepped back toward her patrol car. She reached for the door handle, the flashlight swinging lightly in her hand. She radioed once more, just to maintain contact. That was the last message anyone would hear from her. The road stayed silent. The unoccupied car remained where it was. And Emily Parker, experienced and alert, simply vanished. No struggle, no scream, no sign of what had happened. The quiet highway became the first scene in a mystery that would baffle authorities for years, leaving her family desperate for answers and a town forever haunted by her disappearance. Minutes passed after Emily's last check-in. Dispatch tried to reach her again, but the radio remained silent. The familiar crackle of her voice never came back. "Emily, do you copy?" The dispatcher called, the urgency in his tone growing with each attempt. The small station fell into a tense quiet. Everyone knew something was wrong. It was unlike her to go this long without a response. Within moments, another officer, Tom Harris, was dispatched to her last known location. He grabbed his keys and radio, his patrol car engine roaring to life as he sped down the dark highway. The night seemed heavier, the wind eerier. Every shadow in the trees felt alive. He reached mile marker 23, scanning the roadside with his flashlight. Nothing. The car Emily had reported was still there, parked and empty. The radio crackled again, now with Tom's voice reporting, "I'm at the vehicle." No one here. Dispatch's voice was tense but calm. "Check the perimeter. See if she stepped into the woods or the ditch." Tom jumped out of his car, scanning the nearby trees and the grassy shoulder. The silence pressed down, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Minutes stretched like hours. Tom radioed back, reporting every detail. The vehicle was locked, no footprints, nothing out of place. Yet Emily was nowhere. Her patrol car, now far behind, was invisible to him in the shadows. Her flashlight, her hat, everything she carried, could have been left behind in a moment, or maybe she simply vanished. Each second without an answer made the night feel heavier. The dispatcher called again, voice tight with concern. Still, no reply. Emily Parker had disappeared, leaving nothing but an empty highway and a growing sense of dread. The first responders arrived within minutes, lights cutting through the darkness like blades. Patrol cars lined the shoulder of the highway, red and blue reflections bouncing on the nearby trees. The engine of Emily's car hummed softly, as if waiting. Her taillights glowed faintly in the night, abandoned and eerie. The first officer to reach the vehicle, Sergeant Miller, slowed to a crawl, scanning every inch. Inside the car, Emily's hat lay neatly on the driver's seat, as if she had just stepped out for a moment. The seatbelt was unbuckled, and her flashlight rested in the dirt nearby, its beam dull from the night air. The driver's door was opened slightly, swinging gently with the breeze. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet the absence of Emily made the scene surreal. Officers moved cautiously around the patrol car, searching the nearby ditch and shoulder. Flashlights cut through the dark, highlighting tire tracks, scattered leaves, and shadows that seemed too deep. The silence of the night pressed down on them, heavier than before. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the car door made hearts race. Questions filled the air. How could a trained officer simply disappear? Where could she have gone? Dispatchers coordinated the response, directing teams to search the nearby woods, the small stream that ran alongside the highway, and the hills beyond. Volunteers from the community arrived, offering blankets, flashlights, and support. Yet, even with so many eyes scanning the darkness, there was no sign of Emily. Her patrol car became a haunting reminder of the unknown. The town's fear started to spread. Neighbors and passing drivers slowed to look, whispering about the missing officer. Rumors began almost immediately. Had she chased someone into the woods? Was she abducted? Or had she walked into the night on her own? The questions mounted with each passing moment, but answers were nowhere to be found. That patrol car, humming quietly under the faint glow of its headlights, would be the first chilling piece of evidence in a mystery that would grip the town for decades. Search teams fanned out around the patrol car, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the darkness. The forest loomed like a black wall, shadows twisting in every direction. Officers moved carefully, scanning every tree, every ditch, every patch of brush. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying nothing but silence. Diversions of moonlight reflected off the leaves, but no sign of Emily appeared. The beams of flashlights stretched into the blackness, bouncing off trunks and low branches, but the night swallowed each light almost instantly. Every step seemed to echo, but there was no answer, no movement, no sound of footsteps except their own. Officers called out her name, their voices sharp and urgent, hoping for a reply, any reply. Dogs were brought in to track scents, noses to the ground, tails alert. The animals sniffed, circled, and ran along the ditches, but they came back empty-pawed. Every trail they followed ended in nothing. Sweat dripped from foreheads, and hearts raced with each passing minute. The searchers grew more desperate, combing every inch they could reach, yet the forest seemed to hold her tighter than ever. The emptiness pressed down on everyone. No clothing, no personal items, no footprints, only the faint crunch of leaves beneath their boots. By the hour's end, frustration and fear began to creep into the team. How could an officer disappear without a trace? The patrol car remained a silent witness, its engine quietly humming, as if mocking the frantic efforts of those searching for her. The night held its secrets tightly, and the first true sense of dread settled over the scene. Word of Emily's disappearance spread quickly through the small town. Fellow officers, worried and confused, called in family members and neighbors. Rumors flew faster than verified information. Someone saw a figure near the highway. Another claimed they heard screams in the distance. Every passing story added weight to the fear. Her family was notified within the hour. Parents rushed to the scene, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. The reality of her absence hit harder than anyone expected. Her mother clutched a photo of Emily in uniform, shaking as she whispered her daughter's name over and over. Her father spoke in short, sharp bursts, trying to control his panic but failing with every step. Local residents gathered near the highway, watching flashing lights paint the trees red and blue. The town that once felt safe now felt exposed. Conversations buzzed with speculation. Had she been kidnapped? Was it an accident? Could someone from town be involved? Fear rippled like waves, moving through homes, diners, and gas stations. Officers coordinated search efforts while dispatch lines were flooded with calls from worried citizens. Volunteers arrived, offering support and supplies, but anxiety hung heavy in the air. Every sound, a barking dog, a passing car, the rustle of leaves, set hearts racing. In every home, the same question burned. Where was she? The missing patrolwoman was no longer just an officer on a night shift. She had become the center of a terrifying mystery. The town realized that whatever happened on that quiet highway had shattered their sense of safety forever. As the night wore on, whispers began to circulate among the officers and townspeople. Some said she must have chased after someone, a driver who fled, a stranger in the woods. Others feared the worst, that she had been taken by someone with bad intentions. The idea that she could have disappeared on her own felt impossible to most. Detectives reviewed the scene again and again. The patrol car was in perfect condition. Nothing was disturbed inside. No struggle, no signs of a fight, no clue to suggest she left willingly. Every officer at the scene felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. They could only speculate. Neighbors who had lived along the highway for decades shared their own theories. One claimed she had seen a suspicious man in the area a few days before. Another said she must have stumbled into the woods and gotten lost. Stories overlapped, conflicted, and yet none provided answers. Even within the police station, the conversations were tense and low. Some officers considered the possibility of an accident. Others feared an abduction. Every theory carried its own horror, and none felt complete. Emily's absence created a vacuum of certainty, a silence louder than any noise. Her family refused to believe she had vanished on purpose. Her parents clung to the hope that something, anything, would explain her disappearance. Friends and colleagues held their own theories in private, careful not to raise false hope but unable to ignore the gnawing fear. By morning, the town was on edge. The highway had become a place of dread. Everyone asked the same question: where was Officer Emily Parker? The unanswered questions set the stage for a mystery that would haunt the community for decades. The whispers, the theories, and the fear would grow louder with every passing year, marking the beginning of a case that would remain unsolved for far too long. Within hours of Emily's disappearance, the highway was swarmed with police activity. Patrol cars lined the shoulder, their red and blue lights flashing against the trees, bouncing across the wet pavement and darkened fields. Dozens of officers moved quickly, stepping out of their vehicles with flashlights, radios, and clipboards, ready to comb every inch of the area. Every officer knew the urgency. A fellow officer was missing, and every minute counted. Sergeant Miller coordinated the operation, speaking into his radio. Teams were assigned sectors: the highway, nearby woods, the small stream, and the ditches along the roadside. Officers moved with purpose, scanning for any trace of Emily. Some checked her patrol car again, looking for fingerprints, footprints, or dropped items. Others ventured into the forest, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Volunteers from the town began to arrive, bringing flashlights, blankets, and water. They handed out flyers and photos of Emily, ready to show them to anyone they encountered. The community had never seen a search this large. People whispered, "We have to find her. We have to bring her home." Their determination was strong, but so was the fear. Dispatch lines buzzed constantly with reports, questions, and updates. Every officer was in contact with command, coordinating their search. Dogs were brought in to sniff the perimeter, trained to track human scent. Helicopters were requested, additional patrols called in from nearby towns. The small town had never experienced anything like this. As night deepened, the sense of urgency grew. Every officer knew time was slipping away. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every distant sound was watched carefully. Emily Parker was out there somewhere, and the search was just beginning. The highway that had felt empty hours ago now teemed with flashing lights, determined faces, and an unspoken fear that gripped everyone at the scene. Above the dark forest, helicopters roared, their blades slicing the night air. Spotlights scanned the trees, sweeping back and forth, cutting long beams of light through the shadows below. From above, the search looked organized, precise. From below, it was overwhelming. Flashlights on the ground met the light from above, but the night seemed endless and empty. Inside the helicopters, pilots and officers called out coordinates and directions. Radios crackled constantly, connecting the ground teams with the aerial search. "Sector 4 clear," one voice reported. "Moving to the East Ridge," another answered. The coordination was seamless, but the forest swallowed their efforts. Trees stretched like walls, and every movement in the shadows seemed to vanish instantly. On the ground, officers moved in sync with the helicopters, scanning their assigned zones. Dogs sniffed the edges of streams and ditches, ears perked for any signal of a scent. Volunteers called out, shining their flashlights into the darkness. Despite the massive effort, nothing showed. No footprints. No sign of a struggle. No trace of Emily Parker. The noise of the helicopter blades echoed through the trees, bouncing off hills and valleys. The wind carried the sound, mixing with the rustle of leaves, snapping twigs, and distant animal calls. Every movement made the teams tense, expecting to see something, anything that could point them to her location. Hours passed, and frustration grew. The forest held its secrets tightly. Teams regrouped, checked maps, compared sectors, and discussed new strategies. But even with every eye scanning, every light piercing the darkness, the patrolwoman remained missing. The helicopter spotlights cut through the night, shining hope and urgency onto the forest floor, but the darkness refused to give up its secret. Search crews focused on the small lakes and ditches near the highway where Emily had disappeared. Teams worked in coordinated groups, dragging nets through the water, scanning mud banks, and checking every hollow and shadow. The air smelled damp and heavy. Every splash of water echoed in the quiet night, heightening the tension. Officers wore boots caked in mud and gloves for protection. Their faces were strained, eyes scanning every corner of the shallow ponds, moving methodically. Divers waded into deeper areas, plunging into cold water, searching with hands and poles. Volunteers helped haul nets and shine lights over the water surface. Silence fell over the teams except for occasional instructions and splashes from the search. Every creek, every ditch, every inch of the roadside waterways was checked. Boats moved slowly along the reservoirs, lights bouncing off the waves, reflecting on the wet asphalt. Dogs were brought to the shorelines to sniff, but even they came back with nothing. The forest around the water remained dark and still, as if mocking their efforts. Hours turned into a long, tense night. Officers called in updates over radios, but the answer was always the same: nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no personal items, no signs of Emily. Frustration and worry grew heavier with each empty sweep of the water. Each person knew the longer they found nothing, the more desperate the situation became. Despite their experience and determination, the teams felt powerless. The mud and water clung to boots and gloves, reminding them how physically demanding the task was. Yet nothing could prepare them for the emptiness, the eerie silence of the dark pools. Every second, hope and fear battled inside them. Emily Parker was out there somewhere, and the search continued, relentless and grim, with the night showing no mercy and giving up no secrets. As the official search grew more intense, the town itself became part of the effort. Volunteers printed missing posters, some in black and white, others in color, with Emily's smiling face and the words "Missing, please help" in bold letters. Posters were taped to gas stations, diners, bus stops, and telephone poles. No corner of the small town was left untouched. People knocked on doors, asking neighbors if they had seen Emily or anyone suspicious. Local shopkeepers checked their security footage and reported anything unusual. Strangers in town were questioned politely but urgently. Everyone moved quickly, hoping that anyone, might have a clue. Friends and neighbors formed search parties, walking along roadsides and trails near the highway. Children, though too young to fully understand, held posters in their hands and helped place them in visible locations. Adults whispered, "We have to find her," while their eyes scanned the darkened streets for any hint of the missing officer. Local businesses displayed her photo in their windows. Churches and community centers offered support to her family, bringing blankets, water, and food for the volunteers. The sense of unity was strong, but so was the fear. Every shadow, every passing car, every late-night noise added to the tension gripping the town. Even with everyone working tirelessly, Emily Parker was nowhere to be found. Hours passed, and the town's anxiety grew. Each unanswered question weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The highways and streets that had once felt safe now seemed strange and threatening. The town realized that a single moment, a patrol woman checking a stopped car, had changed everything. The community's efforts showed determination, love, and desperation. But despite their best intentions and every poster hung, every door knocked on, the search yielded no clues. Emily's disappearance remained a terrifying mystery, one that would not soon be forgotten. Her family refused to sit in silence. Within days, they organized candlelight vigils to honor Emily and keep hope alive. Friends, neighbors, and fellow officers gathered around, holding photos of her in uniform. Candles flickered in the cool night air, their small flames of fragile light against the darkness. Parents spoke softly, reciting prayers and sharing memories. Each word carried a mix of sorrow and determination. Friends held hands, some whispering encouragement, others simply standing in silent support. Tears streaked faces as people looked at the photos, Emily smiling, proud in her patrol uniform, unaware that her life had taken such a sudden, mysterious turn. The vigils grew week by week. People lit candles along sidewalks, in front of the police station, and near the highway where she had disappeared. Every flame was a symbol of hope, a quiet demand for answers. Voices trembled as prayers were offered aloud, calling on anyone who might know something to come forward. The town felt the weight of the missing officer deeply. Children watched from porches, adults whispered about the bravery it took to face each day without knowing her fate. Even in the darkest hours, the community refused to give up. The sight of hundreds standing together, united in grief and hope, was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Every candle reflected the collective fear and love of a town desperate for its missing patrolwoman to return. As the days turned into weeks, the silence around Emily's disappearance began to fill with whispers. The town needed explanations, even if none were certain. Some claimed a drifter had been passing through the area that night and took her. Others quietly suspected someone closer to the force, an officer who had been acting strangely. Rumors spread fast. In diners, gas stations, and grocery stores, people spoke in hushed tones, always looking over their shoulders. A few suggested a darker possibility. Maybe Emily had chosen to leave, to vanish on her own. Those words were whispered reluctantly, but the idea planted seeds of doubt in the minds of some townspeople. Police officers grew frustrated. Tips poured in constantly, many of them useless, some suspicious. Each new rumor pulled investigators in a different direction, consuming time and energy. Detectives had to sort the credible from the imagined, trying to follow leads without being distracted by gossip. Her family listened to some of these theories and shook their heads. They could not believe she would ever walk away from her life, her badge, or the people who loved her. Still, the endless speculation made every phone call, every knock on the door, every passing car feel charged with fear. Even the town itself began to change. The highways and streets that had once felt familiar now carried tension. People glanced nervously at strangers, at passing cars, and at the forest lining the roads. Every night brought more questions, no answers, and an increasing fear that something terrible had truly happened. The combination of hope, fear, and rumor made the small town tense and restless. Everyone wanted to believe she would be found, but the mystery around her disappearance was growing, tightening its grip on the community. The whispers, the suspicions, and the uncertainty would linger for months, maybe years, shaping the way everyone remembered that night forever. Emily's parents refused to listen to the rumors. Each whisper, each story of her running away or disappearing on her own, was met with anger and heartbreak. They knew their daughter. She loved her job. She loved serving her town. She would never just vanish without a word. Every night, they returned to the highway where she had last been seen, driving slowly along the stretch of road, scanning the forest, the ditches, and the edge of the reservoirs. They called her name into the darkness, hoping for any response, any sign. The silence was deafening. Their grief mixed with determination. They would not give up. At home, her mother pinned photos of Emily to the refrigerator, on walls, and near the phones. Each photo was a reminder of who she was and why they could not believe the stories suggesting she left willingly. Her father kept her patrol hat and flashlight on the living room table, items recovered from the scene. To him, they were sacred reminders of her courage and her service. Friends and neighbors often tried to console them, offering what words they could. But Emily's parents needed more than comfort. They needed truth. They knew that their daughter had been taken, that someone with evil intent had ended her shift that night. Nothing else made sense. Every news article, every tip, every rumor was carefully filtered through their unwavering belief that Emily did not abandon her life or her family. They spoke at vigils to reporters and at every opportunity they could, making it clear Emily Parker was missing, and it was not by choice. Their voices carried through the small town, shaking those who thought it might have been an accident or her own decision. They demanded that investigators keep searching, keep asking questions, keep following every lead, no matter how small. For Emily's parents, the case was simple. Their daughter had been taken, and she deserved justice. Every heartbeat, every prayer, every tear reinforced the same truth. Someone evil had acted that night, and one day they would be found. Until then, they would refuse to believe anything else. Their love, faith, and determination became a lifeline, keeping hope alive in the darkest hours of the search. Weeks turn into months, and months turn into years. The once massive search for Emily Parker had slowed to a crawl. The highways were quiet again, the forests dark but empty. Volunteers stopped showing up, and the town returned to a fragile normal. But her absence never left. Detectives now worked from their desks, sifting through thin case files, faded maps, and yellowing reports. Every document held a trace of hope, but nothing new surfaced. Names were checked and double-checked. Leads that had seemed promising months ago had turned cold. Each call from a tip line felt like a candle flickering, small and easily extinguished. The patrol car, the flashlight, and the hat had all been cataloged, photographed, and analyzed repeatedly. Every item was carefully stored, preserved for a day when someone might finally notice a clue that others had missed. Yet the files remained mostly empty of answers. The small police station carried a quiet tension. Officers spoke in hushed tones, sharing theories and frustrations. Maybe she wandered off, one suggested quietly. No, she wouldn't, another replied sharply. Every day, detectives reviewed reports, compared notes, and mapped her last known movements. But every new angle, every review of evidence, seemed to lead only to another wall. For her family, the passage of time was unbearable. Every knock on the door, every phone call, and every story in the papers raised hope, only to crush it moments later. The patrolwoman's smiling face in photographs became a constant reminder of what was missing, not just the person, but answers. The case was slowly being filed away, gathering dust, a ghost in the records. Emily Parker's disappearance had become a puzzle with no pieces. And the longer the detectives stared at the empty files, the heavier the weight of unanswered questions pressed on everyone who still remembered that night. Years after Emily vanished, a new lead arrived. A trucker reported seeing a large rig parked near the highway around the time she disappeared. Detectives grabbed at the lead with cautious hope. They began interviewing truck drivers who had been in the area that night, pulling logs and checking shipping records. Each driver told a story. "I was at the next rest stop," one said. "I didn't see anyone," said another. Names were cross-checked, alibis verified. Officers drove highways, stopping at motels and gas stations, following every report of trucks in the region. Each conversation brought careful notes, careful hope. The detectives spent days interviewing drivers, checking cell records, and reviewing highway cameras where available. They examined the truck's reported make, color, and license plate details. They even revisited the site where Emily's car was found, comparing the tire tracks to the trucker's description. But every lead ran cold. Every trucker's story checked out. Every alibi verified. Nothing connected them to Emily. Even the truck that had been spotted near the highway left no trace, no fingerprints, no personal items, no evidence that could tie it to the disappearance. Officers returned to the station, exhausted but still determined. They compiled reports, updated maps, and filed the interviews carefully. The trucker tip, which had briefly reignited hope, had become another dead end. The frustration was palpable. Detectives knew that every wasted lead meant more time lost, more unanswered questions, and more pain for her family. Still, they vowed to keep checking every story, every call, and every possible witness. Emily Parker's case might be cold, but they refused to treat it as forgotten. Another tip arrived from a local diner. Days before Emily disappeared, a man had been asking questions about female officers on duty in the area. Witnesses described him vaguely: tall, thin, always polite but persistent. Detectives took note immediately. Officers tracked him down using the descriptions and restaurant records. They brought him in for questioning. The interrogation room was quiet, tense, the fluorescent lights buzzing above. Detectives asked about his whereabouts, his reason for asking about officers, and whether he had been near the highway that night. The man claimed he had no connection. His story seemed consistent. Background checks turned up nothing unusual. He had no criminal history, no prior record of violence, and no evidence tying him to Emily. His alibi matched bank records and phone activity. Despite the thorough investigation, every route led to the same place: nowhere. The man was released, but the feeling of unease lingered. Officers documented every detail, noting the potential threat but finding no proof. The diner's patrons remembered him, but no one could say more than what they had already told detectives. The trail went cold again. Another tip, another theory, another dead end. Months of searching, countless interviews, and meticulous checking had led to nothing. Each attempt to connect a suspicious person to Emily failed. For her family, each failed lead was another heartbreak. For detectives, each dead end was another reminder of how mysterious and complicated the case had become. The missing officer's fate remained a mystery, the files thick with interviews, tips, and unverified accounts, but empty of answers. Emily Parker's disappearance was no longer just a case. It had become a collection of frustrations, theories, and questions that refused to be answered. The town had lost its sense of security, and the shadow of that night stretched longer with every dead end. As the months turned into years, the family began hearing from unusual sources. Psychics, self-proclaimed clairvoyants, contacted them with visions. Some claimed Emily was buried in the woods near the highway. Others insisted she had traveled far and was alive somewhere in another state. Every claim came with certainty, advice, and instructions on how to follow the vision. Her parents listened politely, but with skepticism. They wanted answers, anything that could lead them to their daughter. But each psychic report came and went, producing no results. Detectives were called in to investigate some of the claims. Officers checked the areas mentioned in visions, compared descriptions to the known facts, and followed up where possible. In every case, the leads turned out to be nothing. Woods were searched with no trace. Towns and neighboring counties were scoured, but no evidence emerged. Some psychics admitted mistakes, others disappeared without explanation. The family's hope wavered with every failed claim. Every vision that promised closure instead left more frustration, more questions, and more heartbreak. Despite the noise of these wild claims, detectives tried to remain focused. They documented each tip, kept the files updated, and filtered the information carefully. But for every psychic who insisted she was alive, there were dozens of skeptics warning of distractions. The case remained in the real world, and in the real world, there were still no answers. Her parents continued to hold on to hope, but the psychic's messages became another layer of mystery, confusing both investigators and the community. Every unverified story pulled attention from genuine leads, and the search for Emily Parker became harder to manage. In the end, the visions remained just that, visions. During a routine review of old photographs and evidence, investigators noticed something unusual. Near Emily's abandoned patrol car, tire tracks had been recorded but never fully analyzed. When a detective compared them to her cruiser, they didn't match. For a brief moment, excitement surged through the team. Could this be the break they had been waiting for? Officers measured the tread, the width, and the pattern, comparing it to every registered vehicle in the county. Each report, each database search, came back empty. No matching vehicle was found. They followed up with neighboring counties, questioning mechanics and car dealerships, but the trail led nowhere. The discovery of the tracks gave hope, but it faded quickly. The tracks could not be tied to anyone. They could not reveal a suspect, a motive, or a direction. They were there, tangible and real, yet completely unhelpful in solving the case. Detectives documented the tracks thoroughly, creating diagrams and photographing every angle. They held on to the possibility that someone, somewhere, might recognize the pattern, but time passed and still no breakthrough occurred. For the family, the news of the tracks sparked cautious hope. Perhaps someone had left evidence of their crime. Perhaps Emily's disappearance could finally be solved. But days turned into weeks, and still nothing. The excitement died down, replaced by the same grim reality. The case remained unsolved. The tire marks became another cold clue, a frustrating reminder that even physical evidence could fail to point investigators in the right direction. It was proof that someone had been near her patrol car, someone unknown, but the identity remained a mystery. By the mid-1990s, the case file for Emily Parker had grown thick with reports, interviews, and dead-end leads. Dust began to settle on the folders, and the once bustling investigation slowed to occasional reviews. Detectives rotated in and out, each hoping to find a clue others had missed. The patrolwoman's smiling photo, taken in her uniform, rested on the top of the file. It was a small, bright reminder of who she had been. Officers would glance at it during case reviews, a quiet acknowledgement of the stakes and the heartbreak. Investigators admitted privately that the trail had gone cold. Weeks, months, and years of searching had produced nothing. No suspect, no confession, no discovery. The files contain a record of hope, fear, and frustration, but little else. Her family refused to stop hoping. They held vigils, followed tips, and reminded the town that Emily Parker was still missing. But for detectives, the case had shifted from active search to occasional review. It sat on a shelf, quietly waiting for a breakthrough that might never come. The patrol car, the flashlight, the hat, and even the tire tracks were cataloged and stored. Every piece of evidence was preserved meticulously in case new technology or new witnesses could shed light on the mystery. But day by day, it felt like the investigation had reached its limit. Still, even on the quietest days, the photo of Emily remained. It reminded everyone that a life had been taken from the town without explanation. The case, dusty on the shelf, was far from forgotten. It was a silent scream for answers, waiting for the moment someone would finally see what others had missed. Every night, Emily's parents sat by the phone. It could ring at any moment, maybe a call from a witness, a neighbor, or the police. Each time it did, their hearts raced. Every knock at the door sent a wave of hope and fear through the house. They answered each call, careful to stay calm, listening intently for any clue, any detail that might finally lead them to their daughter. But almost always, it was nothing. Wrong leads, mistaken reports, dead ends. Still, they refused to hang up, to close the door without checking. Friends and neighbors tried to help, bringing warm food and comforting words. But no comfort could erase the worry that filled every corner of their home. Every day was a struggle between holding hope and enduring despair. Even in the quiet hours, they talked about Emily, recalling her smile, her laughter, and her dedication to her job. The family clung to every piece of the investigation, a photo, a report, a tip. Each fragment was treated like gold. Every little detail mattered. Every unanswered question drove them to wait just a little longer, hoping for the call that would finally end their nightmare. Neighbors whispered about the family's devotion, about the strength it took to keep hope alive for years. But inside the house, it was a constant battle. Fear and love coexisted, mingling into an emotional weight that never lifted. Yet, through every disappointment, every false alarm, the parents held fast. They refused to give up. They refused to accept that Emily was gone without knowing why. Each night they waited, each morning they rose again, holding on to the belief that the truth was out there, somewhere. Their hope was tested endlessly, but it was never broken. Emily Parker's family remained vigilant, refusing to let the shadow of her disappearance consume them entirely. They waited, loved, and hoped, carrying her memory forward with unwavering strength. 17 years had passed since Emily vanished, and her parents felt the weight of each year. Their hair had grayed, their steps slowed, but their hope remained. Every photo of Emily in uniform sat prominently in their home, framed on walls, tables, and shelves. Each image was a reminder of the daughter they had loved, the officer they had admired, and the mystery that stole her from them. Every morning, they checked the phone and mailbox. Every knock, every ring, carried the possibility of news. They whispered her name into empty rooms, hoping it would bring a sign, a memory, or a clue. Friends would drop by offering support, but no words could lessen the pain of unanswered questions. Even simple tasks became emotional tests. Driving past the highway where she disappeared, seeing uniforms at the station, or hearing sirens on the road could trigger memories and sorrow. Yet, through all the heartbreak, they refused to let go. They clung to the belief that one day the truth would surface. The anniversary of her disappearance each year became harder. Candlelight vigils continued, quieter than before, but each one carried the same message. Emily Parker was not forgotten. They lit candles, shared memories, and prayed that the day would come when her story could finally have closure. Her parents' determination became a quiet strength. Even as age and grief weighed heavily on them, they kept their hope alive. Each photograph, each item of her uniform, each memory was a lifeline. It reminded them of who she had been and why they could never accept the idea that she had simply disappeared. Emily Parker remained missing, but her family's devotion never wavered. They were growing older, yes, but they were not giving up. Over the years, new detectives took over the case. Each came with fresh eyes, optimism, and promises to find something that had been missed. They flipped through old files, examined photographs, and retraced Emily's last steps along the highway. Each investigator hoped to uncover a clue that would crack the mystery wide open. They walked the same roads where Emily had disappeared, spoke to neighbors who had been around that night, and revisited the abandoned patrol car. Every officer was careful to review the old evidence, comparing reports, photos, and witness statements. They even revisited leads that had long been dismissed, hoping that a new perspective might reveal something overlooked. Despite their efforts, every investigation ended in frustration. Files that had seemed promising remained empty. Witnesses remembered little, and evidence yielded nothing new. The tire tracks, the flashlight, and patrol hat had long since been analyzed, cataloged, and stored. No matter how many fresh eyes combed the case, nothing changed. Some detectives expressed quiet despair, acknowledging that time had made the search exponentially harder. Others remained optimistic, promising the family that they would continue pursuing leads. Each new officer left the station eventually, replaced by another with the same determination. Yet the results were the same. Emily Parker's trail remained cold, a mystery that refused to yield its secrets. Her parents watched each change with cautious hope. Every new detective offered a possibility, but the outcomes were always disappointing. Still, they never gave up. They continued to call, check in, and hold on to the belief that someone, someday, would finally solve the puzzle. The case became a revolving door of investigators, each promising answers. But the highway remained quiet, the evidence untouched, and the missing patrolwoman's fate remained a haunting question. For the town and for her family, each change of detective was a reminder that the search continued, even if the answers had not yet arrived. Over the years, Emily Parker's story became part of the town's memory. Children grew up hearing about the patrolwoman who vanished on the highway, whispered stories shared in schools, diners, and at gas stations. Her name became a ghost story, a warning, and a mystery that seemed impossible to forget. Locals spoke of her disappearance in quiet tones. Parents warned their kids to stay safe when walking near the highway at night. Friends told each other the tale of the abandoned patrol car, the flashlight in the dirt, and the hat left behind. Every retelling carried the same unanswered question: where was Emily? Even new generations who had never seen her patrol car learned about her disappearance. Her story lingered in classrooms and town meetings. The police station had a faded poster of her smiling face, a symbol of the unresolved mystery. For many, Emily Parker was a figure who existed somewhere between reality and legend. The town tried to move on, but her disappearance left a shadow. People avoided the highway after dark. Conversations about the night she vanished resurfaced whenever new visitors asked questions. Local media occasionally revisited the case, reminding everyone that the mystery remained unsolved. For her family, this constant reminder was bittersweet. They appreciated that Emily was remembered, that her story was not forgotten. But it also reinforced the pain of unanswered questions. Her disappearance had become more than a case. It was a permanent mark on the town, a haunting memory that refused to fade. The legend of Emily Parker ensured that she would never be forgotten. Her story was passed down, remembered, and shared, a town haunted by a patrolwoman who vanished, leaving behind fear, sadness, and a deep, enduring mystery. Every year, journalists returned to the story of Emily Parker. Television screens and newspapers carried her smiling face, the same photo that had been shown for years. Headlines repeated the same questions. Where is she? What happened that night? Has anyone seen the missing patrolwoman? Reporters interviewed neighbors, friends, and former officers, retelling the details that everyone already knew. The patrol car found abandoned. The flashlight in the dirt. The hat left behind. Every article and segment reminded the town of the mystery that had never been solved. For the family, each anniversary brought mixed emotions. On one hand, it was comforting that the town and media still remembered Emily. On the other hand, the repeated reminders reopened old wounds. Every newscast carried the weight of unanswered questions, the sense of a case that had been frozen in time. Community members watched with sympathy and sadness. Conversations in diners, at schools, and in local stores often circled back to Emily's disappearance. Each year, people revisited the story, offered support, and wondered if something new would finally be revealed. Despite the attention, the coverage never led to new answers. Each anniversary was a cycle of memory and sorrow. The same questions echoed in homes, police stations, and hearts. Emily Parker remained missing. By the early 2000s, a quiet resignation settled over the town. People began to accept that Emily was probably gone. The once active hope faded into subdued acknowledgement. The patrolwoman's disappearance had lingered for so long that many assumed the worst, though they rarely spoke it aloud. Detectives, off the record, admitted that she was almost certainly dead. There was no evidence of her leaving voluntarily, no sightings that could be verified, and no leads that suggested she had survived. Their words were careful, respectful of her family's feelings, but clear in their conclusion. The chance of finding her alive was slim. The community's conversations reflected this shift. Discussions about Emily changed from "where could she be" to "she's probably gone, but we remember her." Even as hope diminished, the memory of the missing officer remained vivid in the town's collective mind. Her family struggled with these assumptions. Each quiet acceptance from friends and neighbors felt like a confirmation of their deepest fear. Yet, despite the grim outlook, they refused to let the official resignation define their hearts. They continued to hope that a miracle, however unlikely, might still come. Detectives continued to check tips and review the case files periodically, though most investigations were low priority by this point. The trail was cold, the leads exhausted, and the mystery unsolved. But the possibility of discovery, even after years of silence, lingered faintly in the background, like a shadow waiting to be revealed. Her parents prepared for the hardest truth. They might never know what happened to Emily. Each day of silence weighed on them, every unanswered question a heavy stone on their hearts. They imagined worst-case scenarios, the unknown that haunted their nights and days alike. Despite the fear, they refused to stop hoping. Hope would carry them through 17 years of pain. Every photo, every vigil, every small detail of the investigation kept her memory alive. They would not let go of the belief that someday, somehow the truth would come. The years had changed them. They grew older, slower, and more cautious with their emotions. But the bond they felt with their daughter remained unbroken. Friends and neighbors saw their resilience and admired it, even as they mourned alongside them. Every anniversary reminded them of what they had lost. Yet, even as they braced themselves for the hardest possibility, they quietly held onto a fragile hope that Emily Parker might still leave a clue, a sign, or a discovery that would finally bring answers. 17 years after Emily vanished, the silence was broken. A fisherman, casting his line into a reservoir near the highway where she disappeared, felt an unusual tug. He reeled back slowly, curiosity mixing with confusion. At the end of his line, something hard and metallic emerged. He brought it onto the shore, squinting to see what it was. The object was corroded but unmistakable, a police badge. The numbers, faint but still readable, matched Emily Parker's badge. At first, authorities assumed it had been lost years ago, a forgotten piece of evidence resurfacing. But when investigators cleaned the badge, they noticed something etched into the back, 3 words scratched deliberately, chilling in their implication. The discovery reignited the case overnight. Divers were called, teams were assembled, and excitement mixed with dread. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, hope returned. Something real, something tangible, had been found. The quiet town, the grieving family, and the exhausted detectives all felt the shift. The badge was more than metal. It was a clue, a message, a spark that could finally light the way to answers that had been buried for 17 long years. The morning was quiet over the reservoir. A thin mist hovered above the still water, softening the edges of the trees and the distant highway. A lone fisherman arrived in his small boat, carrying a tackle box and a thermos of coffee. The water was calm, reflecting the gray sky above. He set down his gear and prepared his line. The world was peaceful here, just him, the water, and the occasional bird calling from the trees. He cast the line, expecting the ordinary pull of a fish. He didn't expect history to surface in the calm, silent water. As he waited, the fisherman sipped his coffee and scanned the reservoir. The town nearby had whispered stories of the missing patrolwoman years ago, but he thought little of it. He was here for a simple morning, a few quiet hours before the day began. The line floated on the surface. The ripples moved gently. Time passed slowly. The fisherman leaned back, enjoying the quiet, unaware that beneath the water, a secret had been resting for 17 years. The past was about to make itself known, and he would be the first to uncover it. He checked his line again, feeling nothing at first. Then a sudden, strong tug jolted the rod. It was heavier than a fish, too solid to be ordinary. The water around the line stirred as he began to reel in, curiosity replacing the calm he had felt just moments ago. What he was about to pull from the water would shock the town, reignite a long cold case, and bring the vanished officer's story roaring back into the light. The fisherman's heart raced as he reeled the line in slowly. Whatever was caught was not fighting like a fish. It was heavy, awkward, and solid. He tugged carefully, trying to see what had latched onto his hook. Finally, he lifted the object into the boat. It was not a fish. It was something entirely different, a corroded metal badge. He held it in his hands, confused, brushing off the mud and silt clinging to its surface. The badge was old, worn, but the shape was unmistakable. Nearby, friends on the shore saw him and called out. He waved, pointing to the object. "Look at this," he said, his voice low and tense. They hurried over, peering at the small metallic rectangle covered in grime. It was a police badge. "Where could this have come from?" one friend asked. The fisherman shook his head. "I have no idea. I've never been here before." It just grabbed the line. They all stared at the badge in disbelief. The badge's details were faint but visible. The nameplate had been corroded over time, and the numbers etched into it were barely legible. They realized quickly this was not ordinary trash from the water. Someone or something had left it here years ago. The fisherman called the police. Officers arrived quickly, taking the badge carefully into evidence. The morning sun reflected off the water, glinting across the ripples, but the mood was tense, heavy with the weight of history. A discovery that seemed impossible had suddenly appeared in the quiet reservoir. The town would soon learn that this was no random object. The missing patrolwoman's story, silent for nearly 2 decades, was about to resurface. The badge was the first sign that Emily Parker's disappearance had left a message, waiting for someone to find it. Police officers arrived within the hour. The badge was handled with extreme care, packaged in evidence bags and labeled for immediate investigation. Detectives peered at the faint numbers etched into the metal. Slowly, recognition spread through the room. The badge belonged to Emily Parker, the patrolwoman who had vanished 17 years earlier. The numbers matched the old records, worn by years of time but still identifiable. It was her badge, the same one she had carried on the night she disappeared. At first, investigators assumed it might have been dropped long ago and washed into the reservoir by accident. The water could have moved objects over time. Perhaps it had been lost near the highway and ended up here through the rain, the soil, or some other natural cause. Still, the discovery reignited the case. Detectives dusted off old files, reviewing her disappearance with renewed focus. The badge was more than metal. It was a connection to Emily herself, a tangible piece of evidence that had survived years of silence. They photographed it, cataloged it, and compared it to her uniform and old case files. The numbers were checked multiple times. There was no doubt. The missing officer's badge had surfaced, intact, in the reservoir. The officers began to wonder what else might be hidden beneath the water. If the badge had been preserved here, what else could lie submerged? The possibility of recovering more evidence brought both excitement and a deep sense of foreboding. The town, the family, and the police now held proof that Emily Parker had left something behind. It was not a coincidence. It was not random. The badge connected the past to the present, demanding answers that had been delayed for 17 long years. Investigators carefully cleaned the badge, removing years of corrosion and dirt. As the metal gleamed, they noticed something that sent chills down their spines. On the back of the badge, 3 words had been scratched in, deliberate, clear, and unmistakable. The words were short, simple, but terrifying in their meaning. They suggested a final attempt to communicate, a message left by Emily herself. Detectives leaned in, whispering to one another. Could she have carved this while she was in danger? Could these words reveal the identity of her attacker? The discovery transformed the badge from a simple relic to a crucial piece of evidence. It was more than a symbol of her role as a patrolwoman. It was a connection to her last moments. Every officer on the scene felt the weight of its significance. Her family was called in to see the badge. Their hands shook as they held it, recognizing the familiar emblem. The words scratched on the back made their stomachs churn, but it also gave them something they had never had before, a tangible sign that Emily had fought, that she had tried to leave a clue. Detectives immediately began to analyze the words. Every letter, every scratch was scrutinized for meaning. They compared the handwriting to known samples and notes, trying to understand who might have forced her into a situation where she could carve a message at all. The badge, once corroded and forgotten, had now become a lifeline to the past. The 3 words were a bridge between silence and answers, between mystery and truth. Everyone present understood that the case was about to take a turn. For 17 years, Emily Parker had been missing. Now, with her message in hand, the investigation had a direction, and the tension in the air was thick with anticipation. This tiny object had reopened a case that had been cold for nearly 2 decades. Every eye in the room focused on it, knowing that this was more than a discovery. It was the beginning of the truth finally emerging. News of the badge spread like wildfire. Reporters called the police station, local TV stations ran special segments, and social media buzzed with the story. For 17 years, Emily Parker's disappearance had been a cold case, quietly filed away. Now it was alive again. Detectives quickly mobilized. Teams were reassigned, schedules changed, and every available officer was brought up to date. The badge was more than a clue. It was proof that Emily had left something behind. And if she left this, maybe there was more waiting to be found. Volunteers were asked to assist in the search. Local residents, former officers, and even family friends gathered at the reservoir, ready to help divers explore the murky water. Everyone understood the stakes. 17 years had passed, but the truth could finally emerge. Police coordinated carefully. Maps of the reservoir were studied. Divers' routes were planned, safety measures checked, and equipment inspected. Cameras were set up to record every movement beneath the surface. The operation was meticulous, precise, and tense. The family watched from the shore. Their emotions were raw, a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief. Could Emily really be found after all these years? Could the reservoir finally hold answers that had been buried in silence for nearly 2 decades? The town itself seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just another investigation. It was the reopening of a story that had haunted everyone for years. Every person on the scene felt the gravity of the moment. Detectives gave final instructions. Volunteers were briefed on their roles. Cameras were ready. And then, one by one, divers prepared to enter the water. For the first time in 17 years, Emily Parker's story was moving forward. The badge had done more than surface in a fisherman's line. It had reignited a search, a community, and a family's hope for answers. The silence of nearly 2 decades was about to end. Professional divers plunged into the cold, dark reservoir. The water was murky, hiding decades of secrets beneath its surface. Cameras followed every movement, capturing each tense second. Visibility was low, and the divers moved slowly, feeling along the mud and debris. Every stroke brought anticipation and fear. What if they found nothing or something worse? The silence underwater was complete, broken only by bubbles and the distant hum of surface boats. Each diver searched methodically, scanning for clues that could finally solve the 17-year-old mystery. The suspense was unbearable, every moment carrying the weight of decades of unanswered questions. Divers worked carefully, lifting the patrol car from the reservoir floor. Years of mud, silt, and debris clung to the tires and undercarriage. The water had preserved the vehicle, but the grime made every detail hard to see. Inside the car, the sight was both heartbreaking and shocking. Pieces of Emily Parker's uniform were still in place, a badge clasped to the chest, torn fabric on the seat, her hat crushed under the water's pressure. The steering wheel bore scratches, and the dashboard had marks consistent with the struggle. The reality hit everyone present. Emily had been here all along, hidden beneath the murky water, untouched and undisturbed for 17 years. The patrol car was no longer just a memory. It was a grim, undeniable confirmation of her fate. Police and family members stood silently on the shore, the weight of the moment pressing down. Every person there understood what this meant. The vanished officer's story was no longer just a cold case. The reservoir had held the answer all along, and now the town would finally confront the truth. Forensic teams worked methodically, examining the patrol car and the remains inside. Every inch of the vehicle was documented, photographed, and analyzed. They noted scratches along the dashboard, scuff marks on the floor, and areas where it appeared a struggle had taken place. Her remains were carefully removed for examination. Forensic specialists observed injuries consistent with force and ambush, confirming what investigators had long suspected. She had not left willingly. Each bruise, scratch, and mark told a story of fear, resistance, and final moments of desperation. Evidence of personal items left behind, her hat, badge, and flashlight, corroborated the details from the night she vanished. The uniform fragments and the car's condition painted a vivid picture. Detectives watched closely, absorbing every new piece of information. Each detail brought chilling clarity. Emily Parker had been attacked that night, taken by someone determined to hide the crime. The car and its contents were silent witnesses, finally giving investigators the evidence needed to piece together what had happened 17 years ago. Attention returned to the badge, the object that had reignited the investigation. Investigators examined the 3 words etched into the back. The letters were deliberate, scratched deep enough to survive the water and years of corrosion. Experts compared the engraving to handwriting samples and notes from Emily herself. The evidence suggested she had carved the words during her final moments, a desperate attempt to leave a clue for anyone who might find it. The meaning was chilling. The words weren't just a signature. They pointed directly to the person responsible. Investigators realized that the badge had been more than a relic. It had been a lifeline, a last message to the world. The family was shown the badge again. The revelation brought both horror and relief. Horror at what Emily must have endured, relief that she had left a trail to help identify her attacker. The 3 words became the key piece connecting decades of unanswered questions. Detectives now had a starting point for tracking down the person who had evaded suspicion for years. Investigators reviewed old leads, witness statements, and profiles of potential suspects. One name stood out, a violent ex-con with a history of aggression, known for his past confrontations and unpredictable behavior. Years earlier, he had been overlooked. He had left the state shortly after Emily vanished, and no connection had been made. But now, with the badge's message in hand and the new forensic evidence, he became the prime suspect. Detectives dug into his history, discovering patterns of violent behavior and opportunities to commit the crime. His prior record showed he had both the means and the motive. Every detail aligned: the abandoned patrol car, the tire tracks, the scratched words. They began to realize that this man had eluded justice for 17 years, but the badge and recovered evidence had finally illuminated his role. Coordination began to plan his capture. The police knew that bringing him in alive and gathering sufficient evidence would be essential for closure. The focus of the case narrowed to one man, finally giving the investigation the clarity it had lacked for nearly 2 decades. Police tracked the suspect using surveillance, interviews, and tips from the community. Days of careful planning led to his arrest without incident. The town watched in disbelief as the man who had evaded justice for nearly 20 years was finally in custody. News crews broadcast the story, neighbors gathered, and former colleagues of Emily Parker felt a mix of relief and shock. For her family, Their arrest was the first tangible sign that the long wait might finally be over. The man responsible for their daughter's disappearance was now facing the consequences of his actions. Detectives reviewed every piece of evidence. The tire tracks near the highway, past sightings, and the badge's etched message all fit together. Each clue confirmed the suspect's involvement. With a recovered patrol car, forensic reports, and the badge pointing directly to him, the case became undeniable. Investigators confronted him with the evidence. Under pressure, he confessed, admitting he had forced Emily into the reservoir to hide the crime. Years of mystery and frustration finally ended. The pieces that had haunted the town for nearly 2 decades now formed a complete picture of the tragic night. News of the arrest spread quickly. Friends, neighbors, and former colleagues struggled to comprehend what had happened. Shock, sorrow, and disbelief swept through the community. At the same time, relief mingled with grief. Justice had finally arrived, but at an unimaginable cost. Emily Parker's story, silent for 17 years, was now complete. Candlelight vigils were held once more, this time with closure. Her family could mourn properly, the town could reflect, and the long cold case finally reached its end. The patrolwoman who had vanished so many years ago would never be forgotten. The courtroom doors opened, and the suspect was led inside. He sat silently, facing the judge, his expression unreadable. Emily Parker's family took their seats, their faces tense but composed. Prosecutors began laying out the case, detailing every piece of evidence recovered over 17 years. The badge, the patrol car, and the scratched words were highlighted. The courtroom listened closely, the weight of the years of mystery pressing down. Every eye in the room felt the tension. The long cold case had finally reached a courtroom, and everyone present understood the gravity of this moment. Justice, after nearly 2 decades, was about to be determined. The patrolwoman's badge was brought to the front of the courtroom. Investigators explained its significance. The carved words on the back pointed directly to the suspect. The jury leaned in, absorbing every detail. Photos, forensic reports, and testimonies all reinforced the badge's importance. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was proof of the suspect's crime. Every person in the courtroom recognized the weight of it. For the family, the badge symbolized Emily's struggle and courage in her final moments. For the jury, it became the centerpiece of the case, a tangible link connecting the past to the truth finally revealed. Former officers, friends, and family took the stand one by one. They described Emily's dedication, her warmth, and the night she vanished. Each account reminded the courtroom who she had been. They spoke of the years of uncertainty, the endless search, and the pain of unanswered questions. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of her courage, professionalism, and the void her disappearance had left. The jury listened carefully. Each story added weight to the case, connecting the recovered evidence to the human reality behind it. Emily was no longer just a missing officer. She was a person whose life and legacy demanded justice. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. Shock rippled through the courtroom. Some gasped, others whispered. The suspect remained expressionless, but for the family, relief and sorrow collided. The long nightmare had finally ended. 17 years of waiting, wondering, and hoping for answers were validated. The court had recognized the truth. Justice, delayed but finally served, gave the family the closure they had sought for nearly 2 decades. The community, following the news, shared in the moment, a mix of horror and relief sweeping across the town. News of the verdict spread immediately. Neighbors, colleagues, and local media responded with a mix of shock and relief. Candlelight vigils were held again, but this time with a sense of closure rather than despair. People shared stories of Emily's life and service, honoring her memory publicly. The town collectively mourned, reflecting on the tragedy and celebrating the courage of a woman who had dedicated herself to protecting others. The long-standing fear and uncertainty finally lifted. The community could now remember her as she truly was, a dedicated officer, a brave woman, and a symbol of resilience. Emily's parents visited her grave for the first time since the verdict. They placed the badge, flashlight, and other recovered items beside the headstone. For the first time, they could say goodbye with peace. The pain of uncertainty was replaced with a sense of completion. They hugged one another, tears flowing, knowing their daughter's courage had finally been acknowledged and her story told. The memorial became more than a grave. It was a symbol of bravery, justice, and the unwavering love of a family that had refused to give up hope, even when faced with nearly 2 decades of silence. Emily Parker was remembered as more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, and a committed officer. Her story became a cautionary tale for law enforcement, a reminder of the dangers officers face, even in quiet towns. Training programs, memorials, and community events honor her legacy. The patrolwoman who vanished 17 years ago was now celebrated for her dedication, courage, and resilience. Her family, town, and fellow officers carried her story forward, a testament to hope, justice, and the strength to endure the darkest mysteries until truth finally prevailed.